Happy New Year and welcome to today's video. Grab yourself a drink and get comfy because we're going to be reviewing some books. So in 2020 I challenged myself to read 20 books and I think I got to about 18 maybe. And 2021, that year was just in the bin. But 2022 I challenged myself to read 22 books and we made it. We reached the goal, plus a couple of bonus books. So books that I started in 2021 and then finished in 2022, and books I started last year but haven't yet finished, so we'll discuss those as well. And yeah, I'm going to be splitting the video into a few categories. First category is going to be miscellaneous, second category is going to be fiction, literature, and third section is going to be Christian books. So the first book I have is in the miscellaneous category and it is short stories in Italian for beginners. I've been learning Italian for about 2 years. I quite enjoy learning languages. And I thought this is a really nice way of learning instead of, just using Duolingo or just using a textbook or whatever, because you get, an actual story, and this is really good because it has vocabulary in bold that might be a bit challenging. It then also has a summary of what happened in the chapter in Italian. It then reviews the new vocabulary, and then it also has a short quiz at the end of every chapter, so it took me a while to get through, but I would really recommend this book or other books in the short stories series if you're learning a new language. So now we're moving on to the fiction category, and the first fiction book I read this year was The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. I love this book for quite a few reasons. It's actually the first Russian literature that I read, and I've really wanted to get into Russian literature. It just really appeals to me for some reason. And this book, it was everything I expected it to be. I actually first saw this book in a bookshop, probably Waterstones, a few years ago, and I saw the cover of it, which wasn't the same with this one. It was like yellow and it just had a cat like sitting on the moon, and I thought, this looks so weird, I have no idea what it's about, and I read the blurb and I thought, this just sounds wild, so I finally got a copy of it and I loved it. It was so crazy. It felt like it broke all the rules of the fiction that I've read before, so I would really recommend this. Some people I've spoken to have found it hard to get through, but I thought it was really worth it. Moscow, 1929, a city that has lost its way amid corruption and fear, inhabited by people who have abandoned their morals and forsaken spirituality. But when a mysterious stranger arrives in town with a bizarre entourage that includes a giant talking cat and a fanged assassin, all hell breaks loose. Among those caught up in the strange and inexplicable events that transpire in the capital are the Master, a writer whose life has been destroyed by Soviet repression, and his beloved Margarita. Their adventures reveal a story that began 2,000 years ago in ancient Jerusalem, and its resolution will decide their fate. Yeah, I just thought it was crazy. Basically, Satan arrives in Moscow and causes chaos. So the second fiction book I have is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. So this is a prequel to The Hunger Games, and yeah, I saw it online probably like June or July, and I just felt inspired and motivated to get it, and I really enjoyed it. It's really nice sometimes to just return to a fictional world that you kind of are already familiar with. And so it's kind of a backstory about President Snow. I really enjoyed it. I think it had some themes that I wasn't really expecting but made sense. The ones that stood out to me most were like trust, lying, betrayal. Without giving too much away, Coriolanus tells small lies here and there to get by, and they end up getting bigger and bigger and having more and more serious consequences. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this, especially if you enjoyed The Hunger Games before. So the next book I read was Dracula. Now, I don't have a copy of it because my brother's reading it at the moment, but I do have a jigsaw, which I asked for Christmas. I just think the colours are so beautiful, and I love how it just has the different scenes all around the picture. But yeah, I love Dracula for a few reasons. Firstly, it's really nostalgic for me because me and my family have gone on holiday a few times to Whitby, where some of it's set. And at Whitby Abbey they actually have a play of Dracula where you move around the ruins for the different scenes, and it's done with about 3 actors. It's super funny and, fairly accurate to the book. But the book itself I love because of the style. It's written in letters, journal entries, newspaper articles, and I just find it really fun and engaging. and also the characters. Obviously everyone knows Dracula, everyone knows Van Helsing because they're so ingrained in pop culture now. But all the other characters I just love, Mina and Jonathan Harker, just all the friendship between the characters. Like, nowadays I feel like everyone's a little bit every man for himself, but in this story, like, the friends would just lay down their lives for each other. They were just so brave, so gracious, and it just really took me aback, and I really enjoyed the whole story. I can't recommend it enough. It's probably my favourite classic that I've ever read. So I've not read that many yet, but so far it's up there. Next, I read Animal Farm by George Orwell because I feel like I should have read this. I've read 1984, I've read A Clergyman's Daughter. I think this is probably the third Orwell I've read, and I didn't love it, to be honest. There were a few standout moments that I felt were very strong. Okay, here's a quick spoiler. I've forgotten the name of the horse, but basically when they're all told that he's going to be taken away to a vet and then he's actually taken away to a slaughterhouse, like, oh my goodness, that was my heart. But otherwise, I don't know, it's very obvious. I can understand why it was so influential and is such a classic, but for me, I just didn't enjoy it that much. So next we have Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. It wasn't my favourite book. I did enjoy it. I would recommend it if you do like kind of sea adventure pirate stories, because it is one of the most iconic. This copy's nice. It's got some fun pictures in. Yeah, I think this belonged to my granddad, and I'm glad I read it, but I probably wouldn't read it again. Next we have One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovic by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I really enjoyed this. I like the structure, how there's no chapters at all, it's just one long day out of many in a Soviet labour camp. I enjoyed how you felt like you really got to know the personalities of the different inmates, the worst and the best things that are brought out of people, and how it kind of made it feel normal, even though obviously it's a horrible, gritty place to be in. You just got to know all the little details about meal times, what they did when they're working during the day, and I really enjoyed it. I think I'll read some of the blurb actually. This brutal, shattering glimpse of the fate of millions of Russians under Stalin shook Russia and shocked the world when it first appeared. Discover the importance of a piece of bread or an extra bowl of soup, the incredible luxury of a book, the ingenious possibilities of a piece of string or a single match in a world where survival is all. Here, safety, warmth and food are the first objectives. Reading this book, you enter a world of incarceration, brutality, hard manual labour and freezing cold, and participate in the struggle of men to survive both the terrible rigours of nature and the inhumanity of the system that defines their conditions of life. So yeah, I really recommend this. Next we have Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This was recommended to me by my friend Jess, and I really enjoyed it. It's split into 4 sections. The lovers, husband and wife, the sisters, and mother and child. And it says on the first page, if you could go back, who would you want to meet? Basically, the idea is you can go back in time in this coffee shop in Tokyo to meet somebody else who, perhaps has died, perhaps you're just not able to speak to them anymore. And it's really moving because you can't change the situation in the past, you can't fix anything as such, but you can have your heart changed and your perspective different, and that means that people who are perhaps mourning something or trying to come to terms with the situation are then able to move forward, which I think, despite it being a fantasy kind of book, there's something very real life about that, which I really enjoyed. So I would definitely recommend this. We have a little guest. Hey Obi. So one of my favourite other books this year was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, which is the novel that Blade Runner is based off of. Now, I'm not that big into sci-fi, so I wasn't sure if I'd like it or not, but I really did. It did take me a while to get into it because there's a lot of world building, a lot of describing the setting, the history, there's even a whole religion that's set up in here, so there's a lot going on. But it asks some really interesting questions about what is real, what is fake, the ethics of technology, even good and evil itself. Like, there's a lot going on in here. I'll read the blurb for you. War has left the Earth devastated. Through its ruins, bounty hunter Rick Deckard stalks in search of the renegade replicants who are his prey. When he isn't retiring them, he dreams of owning the ultimate status symbol, a live animal. Then Rick gets a big assignment, to kill 6 Nexus 6 targets for a huge reward. But things are never that simple, and Rick's life quickly turns into a nightmare kaleidoscope of subterfuge and deceit. Now, the other thing that is really memorable to me about this book is one scene where there's just an amazing building of tension. All I'm going to say is it involves a spider. So if you've read it, you'll know the scene I mean, and if you haven't, then read it. I really loved it. I'm going to read it again one day because there's just so much going on. Next we have The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with The Merry Men and Other Stories by Robert Louis Stevenson. This took me so long to get through. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's not too long at all. It's about 50 pages. And I thought it was really interesting, the kind of duality between the good and bad elements of our nature. Is there even a good side of our nature? And I like the idea of strengthening the flesh or strengthening the spirit, and how the more often he became Mr. Hyde and the more often he used the darker side of him, the stronger it became. So I thought that was really cool. And I've actually made some notes on the other stories because there were quite a few of them, so I'll give you a quick summary of each of them. The Merry Men, don't even bother, oh my goodness, that was what made this book so long for me to get through. It had some beautiful descriptions of the sea, but otherwise that was it really. Will o' the Mill, it was peaceful, philosophical, short, I liked that. Markheim, a story about a murder, I actually really liked it. It was short but quite satisfying, and they had an interesting supernatural element in the end. Thrawn Janet, it was a horror story. I don't like horror, don't like scary at all, not my thing. I couldn't get to sleep for a few hours after it. It was scary, short and Scottish, like almost the whole thing is written in really strong Scottish dialect, so yeah. Then we have Olaya, I think it's pronounced, I think it's meant to be Spanish. It's very gothic and it has quite a few similarities to Dracula, but it's much more ambiguous about vampire. I liked it but I didn't love it. I think it's worth a read and it was definitely one of the better and stronger stories in this collection. And the final one was The Treasure of Franchard, and I really enjoyed it. I like how Robert Louis Stevenson writes young male protagonists, and it was also quite philosophical, and I thought the ending was really satisfying, so I would definitely recommend that one as well. Lastly, in the fiction section, we have 2 of the Narnia books. We have Prince Caspian, which I'll talk about first of all. So yeah, this is the 4th book in the Narnia series. I'd been reading the Narnia series in 2020, but I decided to pick it up again because it was December. I wanted something a bit magical, a bit fantastical, something set in the woods, and this was totally it. This was just the vibe I was looking for. Really easy to read, just absolutely gorgeous illustrations in it, and yeah, definitely recommend picking up the Narnia series again. Even if you're no longer a child. Then we have The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which I really enjoyed as well because I love this kind of sea adventure, voyage kind of quest vibe. And yeah, same thing, following the stories, beautiful illustrations, and there were just some characters I found so wholesome and amazing. Here we have, I think they're called Dufflepuds in the end, just these like dwarves with one foot jumping around. I just love them. Yeah, I'm really excited to read the final 2 Narnia books. I've never read them before. I've not seen films because, at least in the more recent Narnia adaptations, they didn't do films of the last 2. I do know the spoiler of what happens at the end of the series, so I guess that maybe slightly ruined it, but either way, I'm really looking forward to reading them. And yeah. Carrying on with a bit of C.S. Lewis, I actually read 4 of his signature classic collection this year. I think I have 2 more of those to go, or 3, so hopefully I'll read those next year. I started with Mere Christianity. Now this was actually the first book I read in 2022, and it was before I started making notes on the books I'd been reading, so I can't remember a lot about it, apart from it just covered some really interesting topics, and yeah. The next one of C.S. Lewis's signature collection I read was The Great Divorce. I feel like the blurb sums it up pretty well. So, employing his formidable talent for fable and allegory, C.S. Lewis ponders the timeless question of the existence of heaven and hell. Can one exist without the other? In the story, he comes across a host of supernatural beings who demonstrate the consequences of everyday behaviour. I thought it was really cool. Basically, in this book, hell is this town that's ever expanding, where everybody just lives in a mansion by themselves, and it's always dusk, it's always a bit grey, and the kind of idea is that people are holding on to things that are kind of preventing them from going to heaven, whether it's, a relationship they had with somebody, hatred, anger, a passion for something that can't make it into heaven. I really enjoyed it. I'm just going to look in my notes if there's anything I wanted to add. I just put, what are you holding on to tighter than heaven? And the idea that heaven was more real than earth. I suppose it is interesting because I feel like in life you can have these experiences that, you're fighting to get them all the time, and then when you get them you're always slightly disappointed, or they pass so quickly and nothing is really fully tangible that's actually valuable. And I just thought that was quite an interesting concept that's explored a little bit in this book. Then we have the Screwtape Letters. Basically the idea is that a more senior demon is writing to his nephew, and the idea is they're trying to sabotage people, stop them from getting to heaven, and deceive them. And it was just really interesting. I thought it was a really fun idea, and I would recommend it. Probably wasn't my favourite out of the signature classics I've read, but definitely worth a read. So the final book I read in C.S. Lewis signature classics is The Problem of Pain. So this book is more in essay form, so it's a little bit denser and less fun than the other books, but it is more serious, I suppose. It's kind of about the objection that people say, how can God be real when there's so much evil and suffering in the world? And it touches on a few different topics. It touches on the fall of man, human wickedness, animal suffering, heaven and hell. Lots of interesting things, and well worth a read if you're into that kind of thing, or just curious. Next we have Go Bravely by Emily Wilson Hussam. And she's actually a Catholic Christian YouTuber. I'm not a Catholic, but I think she has some really valuable things to say, especially to young women. It's about faith, everyday life, relationships, and I just thought it has 20 short chapters with, useful practical things you can implement into your day. And at the end of each chapter it has a little take action section, and I like to get post-it notes and write a few notes down. So definitely recommend this book, and definitely go watch her YouTube channel. I feel like it's really inspiring and really good quality. Next we have Living for Jesus in the Real World. Now this is a bit random. It's quite a general Christian book. It's kind of aimed at graduates or new Christians about, everyday things in your life, work, relationships, money, this kind of thing, and briefly giving an overview of how you can view them from a Christian perspective. I felt like it did have some worthwhile things in it, which I just bookmarked in it. Nothing incredibly profound, but just things that are good reminders to keep in mind when you're making decisions and about how your attitude is. Finally, we have my cheat books, which are 4 very small books that I kind of read just to get my numbers up towards reaching my reading goal. But they did have a few valuable things to say in them, so I'll give you a quick overview of those as well. Firstly, we had God and Politics. Now, whilst I don't remember a lot of what was said in this book, what really stood out to me, which I guess I kind of knew but had forgotten, is that Paul reminds us to submit to the government, to pray for rulers, and whilst that seems fairly easy today, even though politics is still incredibly contentious, I was reminded that the rulers in this time were the Romans. The Romans were not nice at all, and the fact that Paul says to submit to them, obviously not doing anything to disobey God in the process, just really was quite, it just stood out to me a lot. Next we have Decisions Made Simple, and for this the key thing that I was reminded is that God gives us space to make our own decisions as long as they're, in line with what is prescribed in the Bible. His will is not always going to be like, I'm going to give you a sign and this is what you should do. Like, maybe sometimes that will happen, but I don't think that's a regular occurrence. Next we have A Very Merry Christmas, and I feel like this is a nice overview for those people who are not Christians already, who maybe want to hear a little bit more about Christianity and what it has to offer. But for me it did feel a little bit too simplistic, and I can't say there was anything new that I particularly gained from it. Maybe the most controversial book in this video, we'll see, is Transgender by Vaughan Roberts. I didn't pick this book, it was given to me by a pastor who I think had too many copies. But I thought it was really respectful, talking about understanding people's journeys, explaining some of the different vocabulary people use in the LGBT community, but then not compromising on Christian beliefs, and really beautifully explaining the gospel as well. So I just thought I'd read one of my favourite pages that I bookmarked. Adam wasn't God, but he tried to become God. Jesus was God and remains fully God, but he didn't cling to all of his privileges. He became a man, and then, in his earthly life, lived as Adam should have lived, as we should have lived, in perfect submission to his heavenly Father. His perfect obedience was seen supremely in his death, even death on a cross. But on the cross he willingly stood in our place, representing sinful humanity as he died. He took our separation from God upon himself, so we needn't face it if we trust in him. Okay, here is my other favourite line. Model for others what it is like to live as forgiven sinners who are wrestling with our fallenness as we look towards the new creation. So, if I counted correctly and have all the books here with me, that was the 22 books I read this year. Now, there's a couple of bonus books I wanted to mention. Firstly is the Bible. I read the whole Bible, but I started in 2021 and finished in August this year. And I have been reading bits of it again since. But I became a Christian about 5 years ago, I think, and in 2021, although I'd read quite a lot of the Bible, I'd read all the New Testament, I just wanted to read the whole thing, and I did. I got through it. It felt like a big achievement, but yeah. And the second bonus book is a book I started last year but haven't yet finished because I'm really taking my time with it and making notes and this kind of thing, is The Language of Creation by Matthew Peugeot. If you know Jordan Peterson, he has a good friend who's been on his podcast a lot called Jonathan Peugeot, and this is written by Jonathan Peugeot's brother. And it's, how do I describe this? It's about symbolism in the Bible, and it's just amazing. It has a lot of diagrams in it, this kind of thing. And maybe I'll even make a video about this. We'll have to see. But I love it. Please buy it. And I think that's all for today. 2023. Am I going to read 23 books? We will see. I think my emphasis is a little bit less on the number of books now. Mainly I had a number because I wanted it to become a habit for me to read more, but maybe I will. I want to read a few longer books as well. I've got my books that I got for Christmas, I've got other books on my bookshelf. But yeah, do you have any reading goals for 2023? And let me know, I'd love to hear. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching.